why 150 years later we are talking about racism between black and white in America. Después de 150 años de la declaración de la emancipación de la esclavitud en Estados Unidos, todavía seguimos hablando de racismo entre blancos y negros. ¿Por qué?
Of course, as y'all know, the most segregated day of the week is Sunday morning. Okay?
Businesses don't want to build in the black community because they're afraid of loss, and we're afraid to talk to one another because we're afraid incidents such as happened May 11th will come up and open up old wounds.
I think the military has done, I guess a lot of criticism, the military has done a pretty good job with handling that situation.
Culturally, more than racial. And of course, race will put you in a certain culture. And so, but race in itself has no power. In fact, someone has said it's an artificial concept. It's the culture in which you grew up that makes you what you are. Plus, of course, your hereditary traits added to it. But it's the culture. And so if you grew up in a culture where there were no whites around, that the advantage that the Southern black has over the Northern black, I think, in culture-wise, is that when you're born in the South, you know the ways of the South, you know the ways of the white man. In fact, his ways are no different, perhaps his culture is no different than yours in terms of the music, the food, all of these things, because you were right there. Even though you had your segregation, you learned from one another. We learned from the white man's book. We learned from the white man's ways. We learned his etiquette. When our parents worked in his house, when we cut his grass, we learned about how to plant grass in our yard, how to make lawns. We learned a lot from him, so we are intermingled, intertwined. Our cultures are. And so those people who were born in Harrisburg, so to speak, in Harrisburg, I was born right across the street from Harrisburg in Frog Hollow in Augusta. In Harrisburg, the only blacks that were allowed in Harrisburg were the ones that were living there, were born there. And they had mixed neighborhood, even though blacks lived up to this street and whites took it from that street and moved on a little further. But they were all in the same neighborhood in Harrisburg. But if a black from outside of that neighborhood came in, then he was not treated well by other whites or whites in that neighborhood. And so what I'm trying to say is that how you were raised will determine how you react or interact with other people from other races. And so if you don't want to be with me, I have no problem with that. The problem I have with the whole situation is this, is that I know it doesn't make for a good country for us to be living apart from one another. Because if anything, we need to be united to be secure. We can't be a secure country when you have blacks hating whites and whites hating blacks and whites hating Hispanic, Hispanics hating whites, and everybody's hating one another within the country.
So there is another or worse 9/11. We're going to be all kumbaya for 2 weeks, and then we are going to import American flag from China, and then
it's all over. It's not going to be that way because people go back to their usual ways after the crisis. I mean, we're crisis-oriented people. We come together.
So America, this is the soul of America.
America is
living from crisis, profiting from crisis.
That's how we operate.
World War I.
Wars, crisis, we react, we unite.
After we blacksmith and fought in World War II and World War I, while we were there fighting, we were together. When we came back to this country, we were apart. The war was over. We were brothers in the war. War is over. You go to your neighborhood, I go back to mine.
So that's why we are going to be in war forever.
Yes.
My character, not only the Commonwealth, I won't call it a state, I'll call it what it is according to the blessed United States Constitution. Go on, Eddie, please come see. Because somebody needs to read it. Because ain't none of those elected officials in the Department of Communism who've done a God bless the thing since Ronald Reagan.
Did you know that as of last year, the illegal Hispanics have swallowed the ranks, so now the Negro race is the third most populous race in the United States of America? Do you realize that the Caucasian race is on the verge of being overran?
Yo me mudé aquí de Nueva York y allá no hay mucha diferencia entre cómo la gente se trata, porque le dicen el melting pot, donde todas las naciones se juntan. Pero aquí en el sur, lo que le dicen el Bible Belt, creo que todavía hay muchas heridas que no se han curado y heridas que se han pasado de generación a generación.
Some of us who may have had the low self-esteem, and I'm not going to say which side, I'll leave that to your imagination, but sometimes people are afraid to stand up for what's right. Sometimes you see even in movies, you know, people just go along because they don't want to look like the outcast. But to me, the outcast is the one that does not speak up at all. And other races, in reference to the Chinese and other places that come into the African American communities, personally, I don't support them.
As of the Chinese grocers that were burned and looted, in those days, the Chinese people came here not knowing the language. My grandfather came in 1910, so he dates back a long time. Our family is, 6 generations almost. My grandfather came not knowing the language. All the Chinese people could do at that time was own a corner grocery store, because this is what they had money for, to buy inventory. I think if you go back in those days and talk to any wholesaler in town, they would tell you that the Chinese bought what they could sell and paid cash at the time. So whoever it was that said the Chinese sold spoiled meat, that is not true. We ate from the store. We sold out everything that we had because we had a small inventory. We didn't have time for meat to go bad. We didn't have time to sell bad inventory. And I can tell you for a fact, I have seen my grandfather have someone to come in and say, I can't buy groceries today. And he would say, Miss So-and-so. He always addressed the black community, Miss So-and-so. He was always very respectful. Miss So-and-so, I know you just live around the corner. You go ahead and get what you and your children need, because I know you're going to come back and pay me. And they usually always did. So when you say it was a bad segment that moved in to cause all of this destruction in Augusta, I agree with that, because as I said, we grew up in the black community, and the little neighborhood children, we knew them all by name. As we outgrew living in the back of the store, we did move out into a home. But I think I can say that I know the black mindset to a point. But we went to white schools because that's where we were geared to go.
I don't support other races that come into my community, not because of their race, because I don't believe that places such as liquor stores are benefiting our community at large. So it's about what they're selling. It's not about who they are. So I used to say a secret protest on that, but now you know it's not secret. But I just feel like if it's not benefiting us as a whole, not African Americans or Chinese or whoever, then we shouldn't support it. And even in the film, I noticed there are a lot of slides about showing liquor stores, how they were, I guess, destroyed or vandalized. I'm trying to figure out, that may be part of our problem. We have more liquor stores, more people patronizing in liquor stores than we do, with visitors going into churches and in schools. We have liquor stores constantly coming up, pawn shops, everything that to me is demeaning our community.
The United States is progressive and changes with times, the policies, same as the Ku Klux Klan. But the thing we had never changed from 1866 is our commitment to the white race, our commitment to the freedom of the United States. We've served in World War I, we've served in World War II, all wars we've served in. We served in World War II, 30,000 Klansmen lost their lives alone fighting Nazis. We're not Nazis. Never have, never will be. We're for America, for Americans. We're Christian, God, race, and nation. Do you hear hatred in that? We love our God, we love our race, we love our nation. Where is the hate? And as you well know, in your own organization, one bad apple, one person claiming they're a member of your group and shows their ass in public and does something illegal can ruin an entire group, can it not? Unfortunately, we suffer that on a daily basis.
The Augusta 1970 race riot. But the roots of that riot go back much further than 43 years ago. If we can see this riot as a stone, then this is one stone of many that has been thrown back and forth over centuries. A riot, according to Cornell University's Legal Information Institute, a riot is a violent disturbance by 3 or more people. That's it. A violent disturbance that's uncontrolled. And by that definition, most lynchings were also riots. Between 1882 and 1951, almost 5,000 people were killed by lynching. Most of those people were African American. That's according to the Tuskegee Institute. 60% of lynching victims were burned, hung, or stoned because they got into a fist fight or something even more minor than just that. So if that can be our first stone, I should point out then that Georgia had the second highest rate of lynching in the country. Texas was ahead of us. Why did these happen, these lynchings? Well, because the rules changed, right? African Americans were granted equality, and yeah, that transition was uncomfortable, it was scary, and it was resented. Part and parcel to those lynchings came white on black riots. Before World War I, white mobs repeatedly assaulted black communities. They stole from businesses and homes, and they set fire to property. The worst of it came during the Red Summer of 1919. There were 26 riots around the country that summer alone, 26. There was one in Knoxville, there was one in Charleston, there was one in Nashville, another in Chicago, in just a matter of 3 months. Many of these were started because supposedly a black man had raped a white woman, but often these accusations were false, and oftentimes the media was involved in amping up the anger over such a thing. So that's our second stone, right? Then comes the introduction of the civil rights legislation. So our nation, we saw protests, we saw demonstrations, marches, sit-ins, and violence. And we know about this. We've talked about this at length. We talk about it at least once a year during Black History Month. But we also at that point ask, well, why did these riots happen?
It happened because of the conspiracy that was planned here more than 40 years ago in this country, and particularly in the last 2 decades has had the support of the elements both within and without this country that have one goal, and that only, that of bringing this country to its knees and destroying the rights of the people, both black and white, who care nothing for either.
The governor made a statement over the radio this morning and again at the plane that this was a conspiracy planned 40 years ago, and this is a part of that conspiracy to take over our government. This is not a part of that conspiracy. The black people in Augusta are tired of being told that there is no racial problem here. Chief Bequest, about 3 weeks ago on Face to Face on one of the television stations, said that we have no racial tension, that we have a good relation between the citizens and the police department. Mayor Beckham has said there is no problem here in Augusta. Whereas our local officials have not seen a problem, now the nation knows that Augusta has a problem. I'll say what she later.
Sociologists say that riots happen when political and social organizations fail, when our leaders and our laws can't help us. That's when a riot takes place. So what does that mean? It means when a business never lets its workers go to the bathroom, a riot takes place. When children die in a factory fire because they are locked in. When cities don't give residents sewer lines or hire them for jobs because their skin is brown and not cream, riots happen. So let's move to 1970. I'd like to point out that at that time our governor was Lester Maddox. And Lester Maddox, before he became governor, also was a restaurant owner. And he did not want to integrate his restaurant. In fact, he closed it. But before he closed it, he kept an axe handle behind his cash register so that he might scare away any person of color who was trying to be served at his restaurant. What I find most interesting about that is that after he closed the restaurant, he sold over 100,000 replicas of those axe handles. That's according to historian Stephen Tuck. So he sold them as souvenirs. And souvenirs of what? Souvenirs of violence, souvenirs of resistance, resistance to integration. You might kind of think of those axe handles as replicas of that you buy at a museum store. Instead of the Statue of Liberty, you're buying a statue of an axe.
This community of blacks, they were mature, and they were actually wanting to find out what happened and how to solve it. Whereas those that were angry that came into this community, because I experienced a lot of them at 9th and Broad Street, the National Guard came in our store. I opened the next day to see what we were doing. Were we frightened? Were we not going to open? You know? I was reading the newspaper, find out what's going on. And that's why they didn't stay a week, because like I said, it was not the local black community here that was upset about it. They are mature enough to handle it. It's the ones that came out of this, heard about it on the national news, so we're going down to Augusta and solve this. You know? And so I think that's an aspect that's never been approached. Because I've lived here all my life. I was born right at Old University Hospital. I grew up with blacks all my life. I've known them all my life. There's very intelligent ones, and there's very stupid ones, like all races. However, the people that caused the trouble was not this local community. It happened here. But the ones that made it a riot came from other areas. You see, when they came here and made all their trouble crazy, all they had to do was go home. There was no trouble where they lived. They made trouble here, and they went home.
I am from Florida, and I grew up in this era of the civil rights, and I didn't integrate until 67, 68. That was a rude awakening for me as well. But one of the things I noticed even being here in Georgia is that, and I ain't talking about nobody, I'm just talking about what I'm talking about, white people will not admit that they're not entitled to anything. The laws have already told them that we are just as equal as they are, but they will refuse to give up anything because they think they're entitled to it. So whenever someone who's not with you, you're gonna start some stuff going on. Many of you saw the movie Rosewood. I'm from down in that kind of area, and they just started that because they didn't want black people to have anything. And I think here in Augusta, and I've lived here since '76, a military transplant, I've noticed that we don't talk like Mr. Coleman has said. We don't talk. We talk at you, but we don't talk. We do not have any socializing with anybody. And he's right, military people seem to do it a little bit better, but I think that's because we're forced to do that too, because we're all together. But when we get out of these integrated situations,
we're with our own people. And speaking of Sunday morning, I don't have a problem worshiping in a black church on Sunday morning, because you don't worship the way I worship. But I can do Bible study with you, because I assume that you and I are reading from the same Bible. Assuming. But when it comes to mixing with the races, we don't mix well. I hope our children are doing a better job. However, we won't know that until they get grown. Unfortunately, children only learn what we teach them. Like I said, I didn't integrate until '67. I knew that I was black. I knew that we were not allowed to go in certain areas. I knew that. But when we did integrate, the white students acted like I was supposed to. It's an old saying that said, if you're black, you get back. And that is the same thing they're practicing, because we carry it on from generation to generation to generation. And we will never get it better if we keep on acting like we're entitled to stuff, and rather than trying to work together. And I think that's a problem in Augusta as well as some other places.
I know this. I know the autopsy said all 6 were shot in the back with double-aught buck, which is the large things. The guard never fired a shot. It was all APD. Frankly, just looking at that, you got to wonder if all those were justified, but no one was convicted.
Driving that racial divide, because if you read an article about the city council, right, it's not these 4 people voted against and these 4 people. It's the black council members voted for and the white voted against. If you look at, in 1970, after the riot, when I read about Chinese businesses being burned, it mentioned the name of one gentleman who was Chinese American, and anyone else who was quoted simply didn't deserve a name. And so you see these things all the time, and it's not intentional. I can't say it's consciously intentional, because I know the sort of pace that people work under, but it does exactly that thing. It perpetuates divides.
Oddly enough, about a year later, I was called. I had 3 cases to be tried. There were 3 rioters, and it happened to be 3 people from South Carolina, 2 men and a woman. And they had no records, okay? Because when you have a case, you know if they have a record or not. And I was talking to them, what happened? Well, they knew this was going on. They thought they'd come to Augusta and get a TV. I'm serious, that's what they said. They came to Augusta. They got the TV, but as they were leaving, they were caught, and they got in the back of your car, a new TV and no sales receipt. They were arrested. So I don't think, I stand to be correct though, I don't think anybody went to jail. Now the 2 guys who were convicted of killing the Oakland kid, they went to jail. Ray, I'm not aware of anybody else going to jail.
Básicamente nosotros, o como humanos también, nos hacemos propietarios de la herida que le han causado a nuestros abuelos, a nuestros tatarabuelos.
Pero los negros no le crearon ninguna herida a los blancos en el sur.
Sí, pero es también como la gente lo ve. Perception, es como ellos declaran que vienen como intrusos o que vienen a
los negros fueron traídos.
Exacto,
pero de sus países, fueron desarraigados, arrancados.
Claro, y eso es algo que yo lo sé, lo que yo he escuchado de amistades que son blancas, como ellos lo perciben. Porque a mí también me han tratado diferente, porque soy diferente color de piel. Cuando yo voy vamos a decir, a una fiesta, aunque yo no voy como intrusa, voy como invitada, las otras gente me perciben diferente.
O sea, el blanco que fue a desarraigarle al negro de África y traerlo acá de esclavo, explotarlos, estos blancos se creen heridos porque los del norte les sacaron a sus esclavos.
Yo estoy hablando que los que están heridos son los negros, y ahora yo creo que ahora con la libertad que tienen sienten que ahora es que pueden hablar, ahora es que podemos reclamar, más que tenemos un presidente color negro. Nunca yo digo que son los blancos que están heridos. Ellos nos perciben diferente y nos perciben como intrusos porque nosotros no somos como ellos. Pero ahora yo creo que todavía hablamos de esto porque ahora muchos como los latinos y los negros están encontrando su voz, ya que ahora es el momento donde sienten que tal vez se puedan escuchar. Como usted escuchó, hay mucha gente que antes no pudo levantarse y decir las cosas que está diciendo hoy día.
We're talking about switching the emancipation from the blacks now to the immigrant community, especially the undocumented people. Can we relate? Can we make a comparison from that emancipation?
I think that, the Hispanic community, and, I think we're concentrating more, especially, like I said, here in the South, we concentrate more on the division between African Americans and white people. I think that our voices aren't heard as Hispanics as much. I think we do a lot that goes unseen. I think that the concentration probably is on the debate between African Americans and white, but the openingness should be also among other races such as Hispanics. Because I don't know about you, but I didn't hear anything of where were we, during the riot, or, just racism is about anybody who's not like you.
We are now probably in the most better position to bring some legalization of the undocumented people. So let's say it happened to this year. After 150 years, are we going to still trying to recognize that the undocumented people were?
To be honest, I don't think that if Hispanics, this transition comes within the Hispanic community, and the documentations and the legalizations of them coming over and all that good stuff. I don't think we'll be talking about it 150 years from now. I hope, and I'm hoping, and I believe that by 150 years we will all be one race, simultaneously one race.
Do you think now President Obama, the first black president, will switch his presidency from trying to get the economy going up and to the legalization of the Hispanic or the undocumented? Do you see that relationship?
We hold a lot of the jobs here. We are one of the hardest working, we are one of the hardest working nations. Hispanics are very hardworking. I think there is a connection between him trying to assist the economy and legalizing undocumented Hispanics, absolutely, because we hold a lot of the jobs. We do. I mean, there is a connection, and whether it helps the economy or not, I think that him legalizing us will bring up new subjects and new maybe riots or whatnot, but it's something that needs to be done, and that should take place, that will take place, and eventually, hopefully in 150 years, we're not still talking about it. We're remembering it as something great that happened and something we can celebrate, but not talk about it as something that we still need to fix. We're not talking about it. I think we need to kind of find our voice here, especially in the South. I think Hispanics are kind of overlooked because I don't know if you know, but like in New York, Hispanics were heard, and when we're heard really big, to the point where every corner store, every person, no matter where they're from, they know Spanish. Every American knows Spanish. Every Middle Eastern person knows Spanish. So I think it's where we're at right now, where we reside, especially in the South. We are overlooked. We don't have a voice. We may have one, and we hear it silently, but this is the time we need to stand up. That's why we're not talking about it. And that's what, people like me, and I'm sure a lot of Hispanics of my generations try to do when we're at school. If they're talking about race, discrimination amongst Hispanics as well. So, I just think we are not speaking loud enough, and it's time we do, and that's why we don't talk about it here, especially in the South.
I'm a lawyer, and I think there's all the laws on the books we need to have integration and everything, but where we aren't there is in the hearts and the minds. But legally, I think and plenty of laws to protect you, but still, that's not the hearts and the minds. That's that we got to work on.
Mississippi ha ratificado la 13 enmienda de la Constitución de los Estados Unidos el 7 de febrero del 2013, 148 años después que fuera abolida la esclavitud y adherida a la Constitución el 6 de diciembre de 1865. Todos los estados han ratificado en la actualidad la enmienda.